Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday and welcome to this webinar, part of our technical briefing, on this case on reducing embodied carbon in aluminium facades. This is a CPD event by Vicona, hosted by NLA as part of our technical program. I'm Federico Ortiz, I'm head of content at NLA, and it's really great to see so many of you joining us this morning. So today we will hear from Rochelle Collard and Martin Wright, project consultants at Vicona, on how aluminium facades can help us achieve our net zero goals. So after Rochelle and Martin's presentations, there will be some time for Q&A. So please write down those questions and I'll come to you at the end of the presentation. So now I'd like to invite Rochelle and Martin to begin their presentation. So over to you.
As a human race, we're currently emitting around 40 billion tonnes of CO2 per year into the atmosphere. And as we know, this is closely related to the use of fossil fuels. The high concentration of CO2 in our air has a devastating impact on on the climate of our planet. The construction industry is responsible for 39% of these emissions. 28% is operational carbon whilst the building is in its use phase, and the remaining 11% is embodied carbon, which is associated with the construction, maintenance and demolition phases. Today's presentation will focus on embodied carbon. The facades industry is a major contributor of embodied carbon, 18 to 20% according to the London Plan. Our industry has a huge responsibility to reduce our emissions. However, sustainable product development and responsible sourcing can make a huge difference.
Sorry, Rochelle, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. For years, we've relied on the climate commitments of COP21 or the Paris Agreement, which confirm the need to limit temperature rises to 1.5 degrees C. In 2021, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, In 2021, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the first major review of the science of climate change since 2013. The IPCC are a group of globally respected scientists endorsed by the world's governments. The report confirmed that a rise in global temperature will hit 1.5 degrees by 2040. The IPCC have stated that we must hit peak emissions by 2025 to avoid the worst climate impacts. Carbon neutrality, or having a net zero carbon footprint, refers to achieving net zero carbon emissions by balancing a measured amount of carbon released into the atmosphere with actions to reduce or offset these emissions. The European Commission have set key net zero targets for the coming decades. By 2030, all new buildings must operate at net zero, expanding to all buildings by 2050. Major cities are assembling committees or initiatives to drive change. For example, LETI and the GLA plan. Who are based in Norway. Hydro are primarily a producer of renewable energies. However, they are also present in the aluminium extrusion and building systems market. Founded in 1905, Hydro are active in 48 countries, covering 4 continents, and are a world leader in aluminium production. Hydro are the only aluminium company outside of China to have full life cycle ownership of their building products. From bauxite mining and alumina refineries in Brazil to casting, extrusion and recycling plants in Europe. Using hydropower wherever possible, Hydro are one of the most sustainably driven businesses on the planet. So aluminium is a key part of our natural environment. The Earth's crust is made up of different elements, of which aluminium is ranked 3rd. But although we have so much aluminium in the world, it's not infinite from nature. By 2050, it is predicted that we will need a 70% increase in aluminium production to cope with our increasing population and people's desire to live in cities. The only way we can guarantee an endless supply and to cope with future demand is to recycle. So aluminium really is the metal of the future. It's strong, it's lightweight, it's corrosion resistant, sustainable, and infinitely recyclable. The atomic structure of aluminium does not change regardless of how many times it is recycled, ensuring it retains its original strength and quality. 75% of aluminium ever produced is still in use, and over 90% of this is in the automotive and construction industries. This provides us with a huge energy resource to take advantage of. In addition to the obvious benefits of reusing end-of-life material, it actually only requires 5% of the energy to recycle it when compared to primary mined aluminium. Now, this is a key slide. Recycling aluminium isn't a carbon solution. It's the type of aluminium that you recycle that makes the difference. Some of Vicona's competitors do not differ between these two types when stating the recycled content. However, it has a great impact on the product's carbon performance. So there are two types of scrap. There's pre-consumer and post-consumer scrap. Pre-consumer scrap is processed scrap from primary extrusion and fabricator scrap. Effectively, it's manufacturing waste. It has never been a product and has the CO2 content of primary aluminium, plus the 5% energy that I just mentioned that it takes to remelt it and put it back into the process. Post-consumer scrap is scrap it's at the end of the product's life. So for example, it is aluminium windows, doors, and facades that are deconstructed from buildings, usually after 50 or more years. This is the aluminium scrap, which goes into Hydro's Circal 75R billet. So our Circal 75R aluminium billet has a recycled post-consumer content of no less than 75%. Our latest analysis have shown that our recycled content varies between 75 and 85%. This results in one of the lowest carbon footprints of any aluminium available in the world. So Hydro's aluminium scrap sorting plant in Dormagen, Germany, has the most advanced aluminium scrap sorting technology in the world. The post-consumer scrap is initially visually inspected. It's then abraded to remove coatings and cut into small chips. Utilizing X-ray transmission and magnetic sorting, the plant can sort up to 36,000 tons of aluminium scrap per year. The sorting plant supplies Hydro's recycling plants in Europe with shredded and sorted post-consumer scrap aluminium. The Hydro cast house in Clairvaux, Luxembourg, uses this scrap to produce billets made from recycled product. So 80% of the material that we recycle from our post-consumer scrap can be resmelted to produce the 60/60 aluminium alloy that's needed for building systems. The exact same strength and composition of when it was originally produced. Most of the 20% that we don't use, such as other materials, plastics, and other metals, can also be recycled. A small percentage of useless materials, such as dirt and dust, are simply vaporized. So what's inside Circal? A minimum of 75% post-consumer scrap. We then top up with a bit more post-consumer scrap, and then a small amount of pre-consumer or primary aluminium is that's been smelted with renewable energy. We need to reach a 60/60 alloy, which requires a certain ratio of magnesium, zinc, and silicon, and the pre-consumer scrap or primary aluminium just allows us to control this. Scrap dealers must, according to an EU waste directive, classify the scrap metal according to its quality. For Circal 75R, we purchased the aluminium under the EU Waste Code of 170402, waste from buildings and construction. Our certifier, DNVGL, has considered the application of this code a satisfactory classification method to determine that the metal is indeed post-consumer. We conduct visual inspections at our sorting plant in Zamagan to confirm the quality. The result is a fully certified and traceable audit of our production processes. We've received DNVGL's independent certification for our Circal 75R, confirming that we are using at least 75% of post-consumer recycled aluminium. This is an example of a certificate for 75R. These are included on each and every aluminium billet and confirm the exact amount of post-consumer content, so we have full traceability throughout the process. We are members of the Aluminium Steward Initiative. The ASI certifies that our operations are sustainable on environmental, social, and governance factors, that the aluminium we use has been harvested and produced in a sustainable way along its full value chain. The ASI standards assess the sustainability performance of business at every stage of the supply chain, from bauxite mining to aluminium remelting and also recycling. The ASI also considers health and well-being, social value, and ecology and biodiversity, and also water. We must consider all elements in tandem to develop long-standing holistic solutions. As well as the ASI, we also have cradle-to-cradle certification, and this certifies that our product is designed with sustainability in mind and that it's safe to use and can be recycled at its end of life. There are 5 categories considered in this assessment. We have achieved certification to silver, which is the highest you would expect a primary metal producer to achieve. In the UK, we also have the added benefit of BES 6001 accreditation for responsible sourcing. Like the ASI, 6001 is recognised by BREEAM as a responsible sourcing scheme and gains 5 points on this assessment. I will now hand over to my colleague, Martin.
Good morning, everyone. Let's get to my first slide. There we go. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit today about carbon performance validation and the issues many are having in the clear comparison of products. I spend most of my working life looking at EPDs sent from facade consultants, just trying to get a grip and understand how to possibly compare information. Now, obviously, at the top of the comparison chain is an EPD, which is an independently verified and registered document that communicates transparent and comparable information about the life cycle environmental impact of products. They must be ISO compliant, and it's ISO 14025. And these are developed out of a demand for a standard comparison between different products. Now, just to be clear, an EPD does not mean a product is sustainably well performing or green. It just displays the performance in a standard format that somebody can compare. Now, pivotal to the EPD is the life cycle analysis, which splits the product's life cycle into different stages. The X at the bottom of the table there means this element is included in any analysis, and the MND, or module not defined, are excluded elements that are not included in the EPD. So just to explain a little bit about the different stages, you've got the product stages, which is A1 to A3. These are the impacts of manufacture and supply chain from cradle to gate. This is where Vicona and Hydro have our main influence and where we can make a real difference with our materials. To be clear, A1 to A3 in terms of Vicona products, this will include all stages up to our extruded profiles being ready to leave our factory. You then have the construction process stages, A4 to A5. That's transportation to our fabricator and fabrication itself. Now, the A4 is the delivery of the product to our customers. A5 is making of it. Our EPD can be adapted to include transportation, type of vehicle, fuel, and number of journeys. You then have the use stages, which is B1 to B7. These are the impacts of any emissions in use, any replacement, energy, or water consumed in use. Now, for material producers, this would normally be omitted, as we don't know where or how the building will be used. Having said that, around 70% of a building's lifetime emissions are in the user phase. So this is a key stage where our products can have influence due to their high performances. These emitted factors are looked at by carbon consultants to understand the whole building performance. You then have the end of life stages, which is C1 to C4, which are impacts of demolition and deconstruction, transport to waste processing, and any recovery or disposal processes. Category D deals with the reuse and recycling of products at end of life. Now, digging a little deeper under the surface of the EPD, emissions within EPDs are split into different categories. So a group called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol has defined how organisations should manage and report their greenhouse gases, including the definitions of 3 types: scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1, also referred to as direct greenhouse gases, are defined as emissions from sources that are owned and controlled by the organisation. So that tends to be the stuff that you could really recognise, the emissions that are pretty clear to you. Scope 2 are energy indirect greenhouse gases. These are emissions from consumption of purchased electricity, steam, and other sources of energy, but they are generated upstream. So the emissions to create that energy is actually not part of Scope 1. You then have Scope 3, which is also referred to other indirect greenhouse gases. And these are defined as emissions that are a consequence of the operations of an organisation, but are not directly owned or controlled by the organisation. Now, Scope 3 includes a number of different sources of greenhouse gases, such as employee commuting, business travel, third-party distribution, logistics, production of purchased goods, and several more. Now, based on data from many companies that have conducted comprehensive assessments of their environmental impact, it's more than evident that Scope 3 emissions are by far the largest component of most organisations' carbon footprint. Now, Hydro's EPD includes all 3 scopes within our EPD calculations. I know, as I mentioned earlier on, I look at a lot of EPDs from a multitude of consultants and architects. And we've come across a number of EPDs that only include Scope 1 and 2. Now, the reason for this could be because unlike Hydro, most companies don't own their own mines. And the emissions from mining come in Scope 3, as their early production would be deemed as purchased emissions. They would then have to use industry averages due to lack of data, which would be potentially harmful to their EPD results. Now, Cheryl's previously shown you this slide that gives you the various market averages versus our performance. Now, comparisons of green billets often refer to market averages to show carbon savings. Often this is done using the global average. But we feel that this is swayed so much by coal-heavy Eastern production, we tend to base comparison savings against the primary European average of 6.7. For the slides that are coming up, you can also see on the chart that 100% post-consumer is 0.5. Now, post-consumer scrap has a carbon footprint of 0.5 kilograms. The average primary aluminium in Europe has a carbon footprint of 6.7. Current legislation regarding how to treat pre-consumer scrap is very outdated and is currently being assessed by a number of aluminium institutes. This legislation tolerates the use of what is called the cut-off approach. whereby the pre-consumer waste carbon footprint follows the product in its first life, allowing the pre-consumer scrap from the product to come back into the system without carbon burden and basically treated as end of life or 0.5. We often stress to clients, architects, consultants and developers that we are looking for pioneers to partner with, partners that want to make a difference rather than exploit loopholes in legislation. For clarity, Hydro use what is called the avoided burden approach, where any pre-consumer scrap that is used has a calculated footprint based on fabrication waste rather than end of life. To put it simply, the honest and sustainable way of evaluation. Now, I wanted to try and give an example for this. The difference in results between the cut-off approach and the avoided burden approach can be substantial. So here's a totally fictitious billet I've made up, consisting of 20% primary metal, 60% pre-consumer, and 20% post-consumer end of life. Using the cut-off approach and treating pre-consumer waste as end of life, the result is an impressive looking 1.7 kilograms of carbon per kilogram produced. When you use the avoided burden approach, where pre and post-consumer scrap are allocated their carbon reality, the emissions rise to 5.6. And again, I must stress, legislation allows this. So finally, on the cut-off versus avoided burden, here are a few of the differences. Not going to go through them due to time, but a couple of points to note. ISO 14044 gives requirements and guidelines on life cycle assessment. The note in relation to ISO 14044 relates to how carbon is allocated to the inputs and outputs of the product. So it's basically saying that you must really look at the carbon, the actual carbon of what you're taking, and it does actually say how, has it had a life. But the main point is, if I take aluminium from a building to use as an input, it has cost 0 carbon to produce as it's starting its second life cycle. If I take fabrication waste from a factory floor to use as an input, it hasn't been used, so therefore has the carbon reality of its first production. Given the last few slides have shown you on the different scopes and approaches, we've come up with some specification text that encapsulates all you need to promote transparency and comparable EPD data, rather than specific system choice. A number of facade consultants I work with are currently including this text on all of their performance specifications. We've included a note related to Eco Platform, which are an EPD assessment committee where members are bound by certain industry rules that some EPD assessors are not. We've included, it must include life cycle stages A1 to A3 on assessment to ensure all the scopes that I mentioned are captured. We've noted that it must use the avoided burden approach to ensure a true reflection of emissions. And it also includes reference to the carbon footprint per kilogram and the inclusion of post-consumer content. On that point, to be honest, the percentage does relate very much to Vicona, but there are other billets out there. I have, as I say, billets come across my desk and I evaluate them as openly and honestly with my design partners as I can. Now, I've questioned some, but I have also seen more than one billet available out in the market that meets this criteria. So maybe in the past this would have said Vicona only, but I don't think that's the case now. But basically, most of this text really just ensures that any data produced via consideration should be verified, compliant, and comparable. As I mentioned, the biggest battle our specifiers and customers face is receiving comparable information. All of these questions you have the right to ask. Some of these questions you have the right to ask any product or service, not just aluminium. Katya has mentioned that this presentation is being recorded and circulated, so I'm not going to every one. But this is just an overview of everything I've just said. Ask the questions, get validation, don't just accept the information that you give. So to summarise performance, so our Circal aluminium is unique in terms of post-consumer content, certified by a renowned external body for the carbon footprint from the mine to the cast house product. It achieves a market-leading 2.3 carbon equivalent. We have an independently verified EPD relating to both the billet and the product, and we can produce project-specific detail confirming how the choice of our product has reduced your carbon impact. All of our products are produced using Circal, and we do not offer it as a premium product. It's provided as part of our standard offer, whether our customers request it or not. Now, before I open up questions, I just wanted to give some updates from the latest on hydro activities. As we've mentioned, our Circal 75R has a recycled post-consumer content of no less than 75. We've known for some time the percentage is actually more than that. The last analysis we did on our product was back in 2019, and the 75% figure is simply a minimum content level. The EPD extract above shows an average of 82, and we've improved since then. We're now in talks with our original assessors, DNVGL, to look into updating our verification over the coming months. This verification will improve our minimum content, and we would expect that to drop our results to below the 2 kilogram mark. We're being asked more and more by some of the most respected design teams and clients, can we take the frames from an existing building, take them away, recycle them, and replace them with the new Circal products from the original frames? Now, the answer is yes, but logistically, it's far more challenging than it appears. To ensure the exact same windows were returned to the original source would take controlled recycling, remelting, extrusion, and storage. This would disrupt the flow of regular production and potentially lower our efficiencies and increase energy use. The answer is to work with aluminium recyclers such as Alitrade and demolition experts to ensure that the post-consumer frames are taken back into the DNVGL approved Circal cycle. Although not being used on the same product, this does give tangible proof that the post-consumer content from a demolished or refurbished building will be used in future buildings. And finally, in terms of the future, Hydro continually investing in lower carbon solutions. Until recently, we believed that the very best aluminium content we could achieve was around 90%, as the alloy mix needed a small quantity of primary metal. Through advancement in our lab technology to allow us to study alloys in much more detail, we've now created the first near zero aluminium billets containing 100% post-consumer scrap. Our 100% product has a carbon footprint of 0.5. 100% of the aluminium we recycle is zero carbon. The 0.5 is simply the shredding, sorting, and remelting of the scrap. Our 100R product is already live on 3 sites in Europe and has long passed the prototype stage. UK supply is looking likely for 2024, though the procurement path will look a lot different to Circal. Caveats such as project size, lead times, and our relationship with the design team will all be a factor in our commitment to delivering 100R on a project. So this, we have a number of site consultants and architects who have really bought into what we do. And I really hope that improves and enlarges over the coming 12 months before Circal 100R comes out, as I say, because we want partners and pioneers. We don't want people just coming along just to meet a specification. So thank you all for your time, and quite happy to take any questions.
Thank you both so much. That's a really great detailed presentation. So now we're gonna take some questions from the audience. We have quite a few coming in. So there were some questions around the process. So what happens with the coatings? Are they vaporized like dust and dirt? What are the emissions or waste and sludge from acid removal?
The coatings are taken off. As Rochelle mentioned, 3% is vaporized. Anodizing is put straight back into the bath. There is a really interesting video of the process, including everything at Demargan, which shows the sorting, the shredding, the removal of the coating, the X-ray analysis of the alloy. It's a really short video, but if you go on YouTube and search hydro recycled aluminium, it's a couple of minute video that really is worth watching in terms of Demargan processes.
Brilliant. So yeah, we can share, obviously we share the recording of this session and then the presentation. We can share some links as well for everyone on a follow-up email. And then there's another question as well from Edith. Does the avoided burden method make you unique and not suitable to some organizations,
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Is the avoided burden method, I guess, if it's available to use for other organizations? Or is it specific?
Absolutely. The avoided burden method is a choice. Whether you can use the cut-off approach, as I've mentioned, or the avoided burden approach. They both it's just that they are literally just a way of analysing pre-consumer scrap. It's how you view it as a company. If you feel that something that's never been used, that's just been made, has the same carbon footprint as something that's come out of a building that's been there 40 years, then yeah, use the pre-consumer. But it's just not the case. I think everybody knows that. So it's really just how you look at how you view the carbon reality of products. So that, yes, absolutely, the avoided burden method is there for use.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. And I think this question was answered actually, but how many times can the product physically be recycled? I think, Rochelle, you mentioned that if multiple times the CO2 footprint should be kept coming down, presumably.
Infinitely recycled, so it doesn't change the atomic structure in any way. In terms of, it does keep the carbon footprint down because, as I mentioned, it only takes 5% of the initial energy that primary aluminium takes to produce.
Mm-hmm.
In terms, I think I may know a little about that, where that question was headed in terms of our input. Obviously, on an EPD, if your input product is particularly well performing from a sustainable position, you would expect the carbon emissions to come down the more you recycle it. That's actually not the case. We put the Circal benefit at the front in A1 to A3. The recycling reuse in category D is usually a negative figure. Our negative figure on category D is very low because the benefit has been taken in A1 to A3. Now, if you had a poorly performing aluminium input, you would have a high number on A1 to A3, but a higher benefit on D, if that makes sense.
And then we have here some questions around the barriers. What are the biggest barriers and challenges to recycling these products?
Well, one of the challenges we are always questioned with is the availability of post-consumer scrap. Mm-hmm. Now, Hydro are present in 48 countries, 4 continents. We have a massive global reach. We have an awful lot of agreements with waste collectors, demolition experts. But I get it when facade consultants put it out there that, look, post-consumer scrap is the only carbon solution, but there isn't enough of it. And that's actually true. If all the market woke up tomorrow and said, right, we're all going to do this, we're all going to use post-consumer recycled aluminium, then absolutely there wouldn't be enough. The fact of the matter is, it's only very recently that extremely respected clients, investors, and tier one contractors have really started to engage and commit. There's so much more of the market, the tier twos, the tier threes, who, and to be honest with the cities, London's absolutely leading this. It's starting to go to Birmingham, but Manchester and Liverpool less so. I mean, I deal with the north, Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, Leeds, and I get far less carbon driven projects than when I covered a colleague for a year in London. London, it was everywhere. And that's all down to legislation. So what I would say on the post-consumer scrap issue is that in terms of what we do as an availability and capacity, we're improving year on year. So 20,000 tonnes a year we're improving. We're hoping by 2025 to have 120,000 tonnes of Circal. The limited availability of post-consumer scrap is absolutely no reason not to use it. We can make such a difference with what is already there. 70% of the aluminium ever produced is still in use. Yes, a lot's locked in buildings and will be for some time, but there's also an awful lot that can be used, and we must use it.
Going back to Circle, I have some questions specific around the product. So what's the maximum size of a profile can be made in using Circle?
So the Circal billet is cylindrical, 254 millimeters in diameter. So mullions and fins larger than this, we would offer a reductor. Reductor is our non-recycled primary billet, but made entirely with renewable energy. So that's got a carbon footprint of 4 kilograms. But that would only be used on products that were larger than the Circal billet. A lot of the time, being such a bespoke company, we offer project solutions more than we do off-the-shelf products. A lot of the time, for instance, if somebody came along and we needed a 276 off-the-shelf mullion that was bigger than the Circal billet, we would simply create a stronger, thicker walled profile that was within the Circal size. So we have lots of options, but 254 is the answer to the question.
Mm-hmm. Great. And there was a question around competitors as well. Can they access as well Circle?
Now, in terms of exclusivity, we actually don't have exclusivity to Circal. All we did was bought everything. So the entire availability of Circal for this year, when all the billets were made available from Hydro, Bicona and Technal building products, bought them all. But we didn't have exclusivity. It's just that it's not available to everybody else because we've got them all. I don't know if exclusivity will run next year. It tends to be decided towards the end of the year. But I must admit, as I mentioned, I've looked at various EPDs, and there seems to be some genuinely competitive billets. I wouldn't say that they're as high performing as Circal, but certainly you can see that the market is making more of an effort now in terms of the sustainable products that are available. They just need to be assessed right.
Mm-hmm. And what about the price of Circle? If we can talk about the competitiveness of the price.
Right. Well, firstly, when we changed from primary production to Circal, we didn't change the price. And as I mentioned, Circal is available across all our products, whether you ask it or not. Price point, Vicona's a very high performing, high quality and technically backed up system. If you compared it to some of the respected systems out there, what I would say sort of tier 1 systems, we've mentioned no names, then absolutely we're competitive. The other thing to mention in terms of competitiveness, you're talking from a system house, you're talking bar lengths of aluminium. Let's say, for instance, we were 5% out on a bar length of aluminium. That 5% will pale into absolute insignificance when you compare the cost of a delivered, fabricated, glazed facade. And then you start to think about the value, you know, if there is a very slight difference in price, then surely that's worth paying for sustainability. But that price, I say, would be absolutely minimal. And I know with the success we're having that we must be competitive.
There's a question, I guess, going back to the point of availability and kind of challenges to get the source of aluminium to recycle. So if there's an existing building which the clients or developer are looking to regenerate and use their existing, for example, curtain wall or aluminium facade, is there infrastructure in place in the UK to register this online for reuse and trace for repurpose in construction, as you've discussed? I guess we're actually at NLA doing a piece on the circular economy report that we're launching in June, and we're actually open for submissions for case studies for products and projects, and we know there's no one single source that exists to show kind of a circular market. But how do you go about that? Do you have that kind of in place for your own company in terms of understanding where there's a source that you can reuse for aluminium?
We've had more than one request in terms of ensuring that if somebody's got a building and we want this to go back into the demargin cycle, the DNVGL tested cycle, to ensure that this isn't going into landfill or anything like that. This is going to be on a future building. So we've been speaking to a number of demolition and waste collection experts in the UK. And a lot would depend on project size, I guess. In terms of making it carbon efficient, really, to get back to the demargin plant to produce the carbon. But absolutely, I think if on the website, or I can drop our contact details to you, Federico, and honestly, just reach out. We'll have a look at the job. We'll have a look at the things we've got in place, the agreements we've got, and the discussions we've had, and we'll just update everybody.
Excellent. So I guess, yeah, it's a work in progress as well in terms of across London as well to access this.
It's a little beyond work in progress, to be honest. It's just I'm not sure on a couple of the projects exactly how much information I can share.
We have quite a few questions around EU directives and which EU directives is driving whole building assessments, how that relates to UK legislation. I'm not sure I understand exactly the question on this case.
No, in terms of EU directives, I think London's doing its own thing, if I'm absolutely honest. What I can say is that my colleague Juliette, who she deals with the European projects and European fabricators, and she also deals with European fabricators who work on London projects. So when you start getting to your super towers, we don't tend to have the UK fabricators deal with that. So the Europeans are brought in, but they're coming to London because of the carbon is a real benefit. They're coming into carbon products. If they can offer a carbon solution in London, then you've got a real feather in your cap. When in terms of Juliette, when I speak to her about Europeans, the carbon targets, the carbon awareness, even the carbon knowledge within other branches of Vicona in Europe is not as focused day in, day out as it is with certainly London.
Right. I think we have a few more questions. Is producing circle more or less economic than the typical production for a product with normal recycled content?
So, carbon performance is really about lowering the inputs. So if you're inputting post-consumer, you need to max it. Post-consumer, you're not going to get any lower input than that. It's zero carbon, but as I mentioned, 0.5 is for the sorting, shredding, and remelting. So if you were to produce something, it really is about whether it's had a life. So if you just do normal recycling, I mean, what is that? If you're talking about recycling offcuts that have made a 5-meter window, and there's a meter offcut because they come in 6-meter parts, just recycling loads of offcuts is nowhere near as carbon efficient as recycling post-consumer. Because what you're doing is you've got, Rochelle mentioned 5% energy to recycle. So what you're doing, if it's never been a product, is you're using 100% of the energy to make the initial product. And it's an offcut now. So you're then adding that 5% on to the 100% energy you just used making it, because it's never been a product. So the answer to that question is no. It's not the same as standard recycling, unless you can include a lot of post-consumer.
Right, but it's about reducing carbon, as you were saying, and kind of the key point there. And then another specific questions around circle. Can it be anodized?
Yes, it can. We have done historically many anodized projects. We've got a landmark building in Frankfurt which had about 400 tons anodized, called the Senckenberg term. That's been there and used on various. We take customers through to Frankfurt to have a look at the size, the complexity, the anodized finishing. We've done, this has been brought up many times, can it be anodized? There has to be some pre-treatment, so there has to be some etching. But we've done internal tests. We're absolutely happy that it can be anodized, but we've been asked to put out these tests. We don't have to. We're guaranteeing it. We're warranting it. We're happy with it.
Excellent, thank you. And I think there was a clarification on the previous questions there. I mean, if it was cheaper to use more recycled content or less. So in terms of how much recycled content.
Is it cheaper for the consumer to use more recycled content or less?
Yeah, I don't know if it's also in terms of the manufacturing side rather than.
I mean, as I mentioned, we only offer Circal, and we never changed the price when we went from primary to Circal. Again, I would probably revert back to the previous comment that bar lengths of metal basically form a very small part of the cost of the delivered facade. So what I would say is if a delivered facade, there were 1% or 0.5% difference, then you had one with an average of 6.7 kilograms of carbon for the aluminium system and one with 2.3, then I would suggest, obviously it's not my money, but I would suggest that it would be the right thing to do if the prices are that close. We've spent millions and millions of pounds in development of Circal. So it's testament to our ethos that we haven't changed the price.
I think, well, if you have any more questions, I wanted to ask around kind of the aesthetics on the, I presume there's no kind of difference at the end in terms of how it looks at the end, these products, and then if you have examples of probably in London where you can go and see where it's been applied.
Yes, we do have look at some small samples that we could invite you to see. So we've got an office in Store Street in London. Maybe we could arrange a date. Some of the attendees and yourselves to maybe come in and have a look at some of the Circal product. I think we may well have some coated product in there. But in terms of visually, you absolutely can't tell the difference. On our samples, we have to because when we did the anodizing test, we had to test primary, we had to test Circal, because we had to test it and hold them up at the side of each other. So there was so little difference that we had to label our Circal, so we knew which one was which. So aesthetically, there's no difference.
Brilliant. I think we're kind of getting closer to time, but I just want to ask to you both around kind of future challenges. Would you expect in the future to see the progressing, and yeah, we're looking forward to how it develops.
Future challenges. I see it positively, to be honest. I see the market changing. I see the perception of responsible bodies, both at client level, investor level, contractor level. I see their attitude changing. There are challenges on the wider market. There are challenges in other cities. As I've mentioned, not anywhere near as carbon focused as London. The challenges are getting these updated legislation, so the avoided burden approach must be used, and getting some sort of legislation similar to, your London plan, etc. Getting some legislation in the other cities. There are committees in Manchester. There's a committee in Birmingham. But as long as we let supply chains choose rather than be legislated, I think that's the challenge. But we're going the right way.
Brilliant. And Rochelle, any final hopes and comments from your side?
No, I completely agree with Martin, really. It's just about, legislation, really, for the future, and getting some kind of balance so that, and making sure that people are aware of the greenwashing that goes on within the aluminium industry, which is quite rife at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, yeah, it's really positive to hear that also a lot of developers and architects and everyone's really trying to start really specifying the products. So thank you very much both for this presentation this morning. Thank you everyone for listening. We'll share the recording and the presentation after the event today, and hope you have a very nice weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.